think we're good there.
Sweet.
Awesome. Yeah, and sort of extending off that question, right? We talked about the initial years, but could you maybe talk a little bit more about those humble beginnings?
Yeah, for sure. Like as far as my indie games career goes, I guess it does go back to my time at Queen's. I met a friend in the computer science program, and there was one summer between third and fourth year that we decided to have a go at making a mobile games studio. And what we did was we made a game very quickly in Unity. We released it. It obviously, sold no copies, but it did get the attention of this sort of eccentric rich guy who was trying to make like games for children, and he contracted us to make this like math game for kids, and like I'm still pretty proud of that. We actually made money, like a very small amount, considering we made an entire game for him. But we did that, and then we made a third game that was never released and never finished. And so that was my first kind of foray into indie development, which is when I was still at Queen's.
Interesting. And you said that was a math game, right?
Yeah, the one that we were contracted to make. Yeah, it was called. It's gone off the App Store now. Sadly, there's very little trace of it, but it was called Agent Maxwell, Master of Math.
Okay.
In many ways, it was pretty cool. I have to say that the art, I didn't do the art, my friend did, but it was a pretty cool looking game.
Awesome. Ooh, yeah. So I do have an interesting question.
Sure.
And it's relating a little bit less of your, well, it's related to your story, but also relating to the industry. I saw that you self-published 2 games that you released on Steam, but for Inscryption, you were published under Devolver Digital.
That's right,
I was wondering what motivated that decision, and
it was kind of something I eased into. Like I always was pretty confident in self-publishing, but with Inscryption, I felt like I really had something big on my hands at a certain point, and I thought I wanted to make the most of that by having the marketing aspect of things covered. The reason why I started talking to Devolver was because I needed a partner to release it on consoles, and I felt that would be too daunting on my own to try and do all the porting and dealing with the various partners like Nintendo and Microsoft and Sony on my own. So at first I was approaching them just saying, could you do the console version? And then we kind of got talking, and they kind of convinced me that maybe it'd be worthwhile to go with them for the whole thing. And I'm pretty happy with how it turned out in the end. As for my next game, I haven't decided yet if I'm going to have a publisher this time, but it was definitely a positive experience. I think my first 2 games, the truth of it is I don't think they were big enough for a publisher like Devolver to be interested in them, so it wasn't so much a decision I got to make. I even approached someone at Devolver with my first game, Pony Island, and they politely turned me down, but it was useful because that kind of gave me a contact, and I talked to the same person for Inscryption, and that time it did work out. So.
Yeah, that actually led into one of my other questions I had. I was wondering, what was the experience porting Inscryption to console?
It's kind of awful. I think any developer who has done a port will probably say the same. Certainly everyone I talk to says that. It's less rewarding, right? Like all this, so much work goes into simply having it function the way it should by default that it already does, but on a different platform. There were some fun things about it, like the PlayStation 5 version of Inscryption has like the controller makes sounds and lights, and that it was, that's fun to deal with that kind of tech when I've mostly been working on PC games, but by and large it was tedious and frustrating, and I don't recommend it. But I mean, so you got to do it sometimes.
Yeah. I think a lot of us here don't have such experience. So would you be able to give 1 or 2 details? I guess, sorry to intrude into the suffering that it was, but yeah, maybe some more detail there.
Sure, sure. Well, okay, so for a Nintendo Switch, you're dealing with a piece of hardware that is significantly weaker than the other consoles and than most PCs. So optimization becomes very important, and there's only so many wins that can be had with so many hours of work. And so at the end of the day, most Switch games only run at 30 frames per second, which is kind of disappointing when, you know, I've been in PC land and I can easily hit 60 frames on most modern gaming PCs. And so doing all this work to optimize the game, finding little tricks to make the graphics run faster, and then having it still only run at 30 frames per second, which to my, you know, PC gaming master race eye is so inferior. So it's just a lot of frustrating work there. And then there's also the turning the controls to work with gamepad was a massive undertaking. Every interaction that used a mouse and keyboard needed to be redesigned and re-implemented to consider the gamepad. So that was also a big point of difficulty.
Yeah, that was a wonderful answer. Thank you. I guess we're going a little bit all over the place in terms of themes, but I'll go back to the humble beginnings and, you know, ask what was the most challenging aspect of breaking into the industry?
Yeah, I mean, my first like real, if you don't count my friend and I's sort of mobile games stint, which was really not a sustainable endeavor. We barely made enough money to consider it a summer job. My first real entry into the games industry was as a programmer in a Vancouver game dev studio. And I think just the hardest part about that, getting your first job, is you're competing with a lot of other candidates. I think maybe even more so today than at the time I entered. So you have to stand out. I think all of you are taking a computer science degree. That will give you a leg up on the competition. I heard from pretty much everyone who was involved in the hiring process that was something. It wasn't the determining factor, but that put me in a higher category of consideration. Not that they were going to necessarily rule out someone who didn't have one, but just as like, okay, you have a serious credential here that we can consider, where many people and many very talented and skilled people simply have a boot camp or a quicker, like 1 or 2 year like focused program. And I don't think those are considered or regarded as highly.
Yeah, I actually have a follow-up question for this. So is this advice that you just gave relevant for in all cases, or just if people are looking to become an employee at a game studio?
I mean, again, all cases, you mean like maybe other tech companies or web development?
When you go, for example, along the indie path, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, as far as breaking into like my career in indie games, that's astronomically harder and unlikely. I think it comes down to developing your own skills so that you can be either someone who can make a game on your own or a very useful asset to a small team. And I think a part of developing those skills was first taking that step in the games industry at larger studios and seeing how things are done on a larger team, seeing how a large code base looks and how a large project is managed, and taking that methodology back to my own indie stuff. I think that was pretty important. So I think I would recommend getting some broader industry experience as part of that indie game path.
Yeah, that's incredibly good advice. Thank you. And some of what you said there, where the competition is fierce, and so we want some sort of thing to set us apart. It brings me to another question where pretty recently we were seeing some mass layoffs in the industry, and I was just wondering what insight you have there, how to navigate that, and what that means going forward.
Yeah, I unfortunately I can't really speak too much to that, and I don't have all that much insight. I have to say, having been self-employed and doing this indie thing now for like I guess close to 8 years, or just over 8 years now. So I'm a little bit kind of separated from those larger companies and their activities. Yeah, I mean, obviously it might look a bit grim as a student graduating around the time that's all happening, but I also think that these things ebb and flow, and that by the time you graduate, things could have picked up again. I don't know. I think it could be a temporary setback, but not necessarily a cause for massive alarm. But I don't know. I don't really have as much insight as I could.
Yeah, I think looking at it as temporary is the optimistic view, and that's typically the right view. So yeah. Yeah. So you have been an indie game developer for the past 8 years. So could you tell us maybe a little bit about that at a sort of granular, like day to day? What is your day look like?
Yeah. I think especially after all this time, I've settled into more of a stable pattern. I find, and there's all sorts of weird people making indie games, and they all have their own ways they like to work if they have the freedom to. Strangely enough, I've kind of conformed to a more like typical work schedule, just because I find that's when my partner works, that's when my friends and family work. So I typically do like a 9 to 5 type of schedule on weekdays, and sometimes if there's something really pressing or I feel inspired to work on the weekend, I will. But usually it's kind of like a normal work schedule. And I guess I usually start with communicating with my collaborators, like anyone who's like, for my new game, I have people working on 3D art mainly, and I have someone who does music and sound effects, and I like to start the day by kind of checking if they ask me anything and making sure they're all on the right track, getting all that aside, any emails, and then putting that all aside, and then getting some really good focus time to just work on the game. And for me, that could mean any number of things. I'm a programmer, but I also do pixel art on my games. I design them, I write them. So any of those tasks could be the thing that day. It could be somewhat random. And then, I kind of try to, take a break, and then again, sit down to really focus on the game in the afternoon as much as possible, and try to mute my phone for this focus time, not have any notifications popping up. Just it's important to be able to get deep into it, as I'm sure you can relate to. Programming can be a very absorbing task, and getting your consciousness pulled away into something else can totally take you off track. But that's about it.
Yeah, 100% with the deep work and getting distracted. I think that's key.
Yeah.
And it's indicative of your success that your routine would be the way it is. Yeah. So, apparently we have no audio on our Discord. Is that?
Just in case you need a mic test.
Yeah, actually, I think we figured out an issue.
Nice.
If you could give us, maybe 2 minutes or so, or 1 minute to fix it.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. Okay, I think we fixed it.
Cool.
Awesome. Right. Sorry, I got a little derailed there. Oh, right. Okay. I remember the question I was going to ask. So, you talked that, your scope of work is programming, art, and of course design. What about all of these three things would be, and I guess maybe anything I'm missing, would be your favorite part of the process?
I think I like when I've created certain design tools, like I have everything I need to kind of design new things for the game within an existing system. So like a really good example of this is my favorite part of Inscryption, and I'm sure this is relatable. It's fun to do, is to just make up new cards and to add them to the game. And, you know, the first few cards, oh, it's like I don't have this mechanic and I have to implement that, and there's all this friction. But then eventually I've developed like a more robust system where adding a new card is trivial. It's just drawing a portrait. Maybe the ability of the card requires a few new lines of code, and then boom, there's a new card in the game. I really enjoy that stuff. Or you know, if it was an RPG, making like items for the RPG and stuff. Little design bits are satisfying to click in, like little bits of Lego. That's my favorite part.
That's amazing. Is that like from a code-based software perspective, or is there a way to do that from a design perspective? If, for example, you're doing a new card?
Yeah, I mean, I think in both senses, like things need to be set up properly. Like I don't know if you're asking like how you would achieve it or why it's enjoyable, but I guess like on the how side, just having clean, maintainable code that's easy to modify. And then from a design sense, I guess understanding the system that you've created and what the design space is and where it could be expanded and where there'd be an interesting space within the design space that you haven't explored.
Right. I think yeah, your response is showing that my question was not properly formed.
Okay.
The design space is a very large space. You're correct.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll move on to a category of questions of advice.
Sure.
So yeah, what is one piece of advice that you would give to aspiring developers? We have a whole room of them here.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's one that I have been known to give. So I might be a broken record here if you've heard me say this before somewhere or somehow, but I always recommend doing game jams. This was something I was doing while I was at Queen's in the comp sci program, and I think in so many ways it was formative for me. And so if anyone isn't aware, it's simply making a game in a short period of time, usually communally, like not necessarily that you're working with someone on the same game, but that everyone's working on something at the same time. So my favorite one is Ludum Dare. It's one of the biggest ones. I think Mark Brown at Game Maker's Toolkit has supplanted Ludum Dare as the biggest one, but I'm still a holdout for that Ludum Dare. And so yeah, you just kind of make a game in 48 hours, but then when you're done, everyone submits them and you play other games, you rate them. And so you get to have the experience of, and this is what I think is so valuable about it, have the experience of having an idea, bringing it as far as you can, at least to actualization, and then getting feedback on it all within a weekend. Normally people spend years doing that, or you know, if it's a smaller game, even months, but like to become familiar with that whole process and to see where your idea fails in implementation and to see where you implement it and you thought it would work a certain way, and then when it meets a player, it goes totally the other way because you didn't expect how the player would interface with your game. It's just a really valuable process, and all at the cost of spending one weekend. I think it's great for honing your skills. And then another benefit of it is when you've completed the game, you stick it on your itch.io page or whatever. And if you're applying for jobs in the industry, you can show them and you can say, look at all these games I've made. And I think that really is impressive to employers. I mentioned how having the computer science degree was something that made me stand out. And I think this is another thing. The people I talked to after they hired me were saying, yeah, like we like to see, it looked like you'd made a lot of games before, even if they were made in a weekend, it still mattered to them.
Yeah, I did see that Inscryption and the or Pony Island,
yeah,
I believe were born both from game jams. So
that's correct.
Yeah, what So you've obviously done a lot more game jams than just from the birth of those two. So what made you decide that those specific ideas were worth pursuing until the end and releasing?
Yeah, with Pony Island, it was definitely people responded to the game jam version. It got like an outsized impact. Like there were a couple like news articles about it, even just the very short version, game jam version of it. And I got a lot of positive feedback. I liked it, so it just seemed like someone was giving me a thumbs up to pursue it further. And my next step with that one was I tried to make a demo and start sending it to publishers, and that's how I got started with that one. With Inscryption, it was more, I mean, it did get a positive response, but also it was just too tempting to not do. I love card games. I actually am the founder of the Queen's Magic the Gathering Club. So the idea of, if anyone's in that, that's cool. I don't know, maybe computer science and magic are sometimes something that might be in both, but anyway, so yeah, the idea of making a card game was too good to pass up, so that's why I couldn't resist taking that one further.
Yeah, and you know, along that development process, there's this task, I suppose, of getting your games noticed and played by people, and I think that already sort of happened with the Pony Island, where you saw a great reception at the beginning. Mm-hmm. Do you, aside from just building really high quality games, do you do anything in particular to get your games noticed and played by people?
Yeah, I do think that first and foremost, making a good game is like the thing to do, but there is more to it than that. Like by good, I think some aspects of quality shine more than others in terms of finding players. For instance, if your game is beautiful looking, I think that will net you more sales than a game that's like ugly but very well designed, even though you need both of those things, of course. So I think it does come down to the game itself, but certain aspects are more important than others. Also having a gameplay hook that's unique. I mean, just look at the recent success of Pal World, just like it's Pokemon, but it's in a survival game with guns. That was guaranteed to turn heads and make sales, right? And you know, regardless of the other aspects of that game, that was a good hook. So I think those things are important. And then past that, I guess there was for Inscryption, I had Devolver with a full-time marketing team and a marketing budget behind it. They did a lot of things to help sell the game too and make sure it was successful.
Yeah. Going back, you did talk a lot about the process of creating new cards in Inscryption, right? So what would be your favorite card in Inscryption?
Plasma Jimmy. Next question.
Yeah, I did that. Continuing with Inscryption, because a lot of people here really love that game. We're curious about the sound design, and how did you conceptualize and create the overall sound of Inscryption?
Right. So I this was a mistake on my part. You sent me the questions in advance, and I didn't notice this one. I do not do the sound in my games. I can speak a little bit about that, which is that my one collaborator for my whole career has been a very talented young man named Jonah Senzel, and he does all the music and sound effects for my games. I met him on Reddit, and he was doing music for free, and he actually worked on one of those games I made in the summer in between Queen's years with my friend. And we would later, when I was doing Pony Island, I had some of his music that he had made for one of those games, and I said, can I just use this on this other game I'm working on? And then he was like, yeah, sure, but I want to like make more music for that game. And that's how we got to working together. But the short answer is I don't do that. That's one of the things I have absolutely no talent in terms of game development skills.
Yeah. When you're working with Jonah, what does that development process and collaboration look like?
Yeah, we've actually experimented with a lot of different ways of working together over the years. The most recent thing we've found that works quite well is that I make a scene with visuals that are quite close to final, or they're at least like pretty polished and looking good. and then I send him a video of gameplay, and then he mocks in sound effects as if the video is the game and kind of like adds sound to the mute video. And then we look at that, and usually I have no notes because he's just amazing. And I say, yep, good, we're done. But if there ever was something not quite right, then we'd work on that. And then from there, he takes the sounds, puts them in a audio middleware called Fmod, which I recommend as a tool for getting sound in your games. It's not necessary for a smaller project, but I think for a bigger one, it really comes in handy. And then from there, I kind of implement the sound into the game. And yeah, that's how it's been going recently, at least.
Yeah, and I'm maybe somebody in the room is, but I'm completely unfamiliar with Fmod. What does this audio middleware allow for both of you? Yeah,
so I think the strength of it, and I should say this is my first project where I've used it. I've done a more home rolled solution for my previous games for audio, but what Fmod does is it gives the sound designer more precise control of how the sounds and music play in the game without having to touch any code. So Jonah opens up a different a different like Windows application other than Unity. He never even has to go in Unity or any game engine, whatever you'd be using. And he can bring in his audio files, but then he could make an event. Let's say it's like a gunshot, and he can bring in a sound clip of a gunshot. But when you have a game where someone's shooting a lot, it sounds really weird if the gunshot sounds identical every time it shoots. I don't know if you've ever experimented with sound in games, but you need to add some kind of pitch variation. So he can do that with a few turns of a few knobs in Fmod. He can do stuff like making sure if there's 2,000, that's a ridiculously high number, 2,000 henchmen on the screen and they all shoot at the same time, it doesn't explode my eardrums because of 2,000 instances of the same gunshot. So you can control like how many instances of the sound can play at the same time, how frequently. And these are all like pretty standard things you'd want out of game audio programming. But I think what Fmod does nicely is create a really nice application that requires no coding. So someone who's not a programmer can do all this stuff easily.
This sounds incredibly useful.
Yep.
I want to check that out myself. And right. Let's talk a little bit about the ARG aspects of the Inscryption and the hex. What was the most rewarding part of that design process?
Well, it definitely pays off when you watch people solving it. So like for the Inscryption ARG, there was a ton of people who joined my Discord channel, and I could watch them in real time, like figure stuff out and hear all their crazy theories of what they thought the solutions were that actually weren't correct, and like the crazy ideas behind it. That's definitely the most rewarding part. Like there was a part where they had to they found a fake order form on a website, and they had to enter an address, but they didn't realize that they had to enter like a real address, because as part of this thing I actually mailed floppy disks to people. But just watching the chat that I was secretly kind of snooping of people talking about this order form and what do we do, and like all the fake addresses, all the like weird stuff that they were entering, seeing that come in real time, and then finally getting the 20 addresses I needed to send the floppy disk, and then like cutting out the website and then seeing their reaction to that in real time was like, it's pretty diabolical fun. So that's definitely the most rewarding part.
Yeah, diabolical fits the theme of
yeah.
And yeah, for this system that you're deeply enjoying, how do you go about architecting it?
Right. So I guess for the ARGs, it's kind of a Frankenstein piecemeal approach as far as like making it work. Like, you know, for the website I used Wix, and I had like it just because it was so easy to create a website with a form. And like as for the parts that are in the game, you know, it's just game code to make it work. I guess as far as architecting the design of it, I think of it actually more similar to designing a regular game. It's just that instead of one person playing it, it's a group, and so it's a series of puzzles linear puzzles that must be solved one after another. A piece of information from one is crucial for solving the next. But I guess the major differentiating factor is just how many people are involved. It needs to be incredibly difficult because when people work together, they are very smart as a group, I have found. So yeah, it's like traditional puzzle design, but you have to consider the wisdom of crowds.
Well, I think it's quite humble, the answer you've given. It's a daunting task.
Yeah.
To accomplish. Right. And still on this theme, do you have any potential tips for participating in the upcoming ARGs, if any?
Yeah, I mean, so you probably just, I mean, the next thing that we're going to do is like when my next game comes out, and that is quite a while from now. It's still in development, maybe a year or more, maybe even 2 years away. When it comes out, there'll probably be some weird secret in it. Keep your eyes out, and then it'll probably lead to a series of events that who knows what'll happen. Like last time, it involved people getting floppy disks in the mail. But if you want to actually know about what's going on, the people in my Discord channel are always talking about it. So if you're in there, you wouldn't miss it.
Okay, thank you. And I'm gonna go to a completely different theme, and this is one of the themes we talked about before in terms of the industry. So I think games are things that we build because we're extremely passionate and excited about them. But sometimes I think some of us may reflect the broader goal. And so I was wondering, what role do you believe that games play in society?
Yeah, it's a pretty big, deep question. I mean, they're art, they are entertainment. As far as an art form, like art can be enriching, like life enriching, uplifting. Like it's sometimes it can be harder to picture games this way when you think about some kind of cheap mobile game that's like kind of just barely entertaining you, but something that really like captivates you and causes you to think in new ways. Like even if it's not like delivering some grand political message to you, but just like making you super engaged in it for a period of time, I think has a lot of value just to your intellectual stimulation and development. I guess those are the effects that it can have on an individual. I don't know if games right now have the same cultural impact in terms of like delivering messages, like, persuading people on political issues or anything like that. I think it just maybe is not the role they occupy, maybe in part due to just the difficulty of depicting humans and human interaction. I just think it's harder to get across an emotional message when you can't, we still, like if you look at like Starfield, we still haven't cracked having a normal looking human talking. Like it's not an easy thing to do. These are just rambling thoughts, but I wouldn't want to put them on too high a pedestal. I mean, it's their art and their entertainment, I would say, and so that can be anything from something that enriches your life to something that's just a passing distraction.
Yeah, and you mentioned a little about new perspectives when you play a game. Could you maybe expand a little bit on that?
I guess what I was just trying to say was there's just a certain value to being positively and like firmly engaged with something. Like as an example, like a game like Return of the Obra Dinn, it's not like I came away from playing that game saying, like I understand what it's like to be an accountant in like Victorian England. It was more just like that captivated me, and it when I come away from it, it's kind of like waking up from a refreshing sleep or something. It just I don't know. It's valuable to be absorbed in something passionately, I think.
I've never heard the analogy of waking up from a sleep. I really like that.
Yeah, I think what I was trying to get at is like when you come away from a state of deep focus, I think when you step out of that, it's a very good feeling.
Yeah, very refreshing. I think that does end my questions, so I'll give it to the audience for any questions they might have. So just raise your hand if you have a question, and then you can walk up and ask.
Okay, so one question that I have as someone who's in first year and just trying to start to learn game dev and all that. So like when you're trying to learn game dev, would you say that it's more valuable to start learning, like when it comes to like picking up on skills, would it be more valuable to pick up on just like one skill, like just programming or just like maybe art or just music and just focus on that for a while? Or would it be easier to try to do like a bunch of skills at once and to make yourself more rounded?
Yeah, I think as like computer science students, you're gonna get like a pretty good fundamental education in programming. So like you can consider that base. I mean, it's not like maybe enough to just like enter the games industry and be a wizard. Like you'll learn so much more on the job probably than in the degree, I would say, in terms of practical skills. But so considering that base is covered for you with your education, maybe taking a more well-rounded approach would be smart. And it doesn't mean that you're going to be like an amazing artist, but if you're able to make programmer art and like just something that's passable, you'll be able to, participate in a game jam. You'll be able to make your own little project. You can make a prototype that you're proud to show people. So I think maybe taking a well-rounded approach might be a good idea, and it could achieve that thing I was saying of entering the job market with a few little games on your itch.io or whatever website you want to host your games on. Having a few games on your page that you can say, I made these maybe all by myself or maybe with the help of a friend. So if you have those somewhat well-rounded skills, you might be able to have that little mini portfolio by the time you want to look for jobs.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Sorry, yeah. Hi. So my question maybe is a little bit more personal, but do you have any like favorite memory from when you were in the Queen's Game Development Club?
Yeah, sure. I have to say, at the time, it was much less. There wasn't that much going on in it. I don't know what it's like these days. I don't know if you all meet like every week or what, but at the time I was doing it, it was kind of just this thing where every once in a blue moon there'd be something like this. And so I don't think there was actually that many things I went to. And so the thing I remember most was that interview with that indie developer I mentioned, Matt Gilgenbach. And that was, I found quite inspiring just because it was cool to see this guy who was doing it by himself and making something personal and able to find success with that. And that was super inspiring. So that would probably be it. But yeah, at the time, like I can't say there were that many things to draw from. I think the club wasn't quite as developed as it might be now.
Okay, we got another. They're coming all the way from the back of the room.
Cool.
Hey, I was just wondering, like, how far through your degree did you kind of decide that you want to pursue indie game development specifically? Did you apply to school and think, like, long term, I want to develop games on my own, I want to have my own studio? Or, like, how far into your degree did you decide, like, hey, this is something I like, this is what I want to do, and you kind of pursued it after that?
Yeah. So when I first started at Queens, I actually wasn't even in computer science. I did like a broad art sci, and I was like, I don't know what I want to do. And I tried like economics and film and all these different courses. And then at second year, I was like, okay, I got to pick something. So I picked computer science. So I definitely didn't know at that point. And I think maybe back then it was a little less common to get jobs in the game industry. I mean, it was like I graduated in 2014, so it's not like it was game developers didn't exist back then. But I think among my friends and I, we kind of thought like, oh, like if we could make games as a career, that would be amazing. Like that's the dream. We want to do that, but we'll probably end up working at like a non-game tech company that just seems more realistic. So I think it was a dream I had, but not something I expected. And I think as I got closer to graduating, maybe I felt like it was a little more possible. And then as far as like indie games, I didn't really think I was going to be able to do that. That still felt like a pipe dream, even when I graduated. Like that summer with my friend aside, it didn't seem like something I'd be able to do as a full-time job, but I did kind of keep it as an aspiration, and I did take some steps to work toward it. The mic is, yeah, just in case there's any.
Yeah. Well, I was just waiting to see if anybody else would raise their hand. Oh wait, we have another one. Okay,
Cool.
They're coming.
Hi.
Hey.
A lot of your games have like aspects that like interact with elements of the that a lot of games don't, like for instance like Steam notifications and your hard drive and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What's the process of thinking of new ways to do things like that?
Yeah, good question. I guess it's kind of like the process is kind of just like what would be like first what is possible. I think like try to like really push like what could we do, like there's some crazy stuff I'm doing with the new game where it's like like if I plug in a USB stick while the game is running, like can we read it and like what can we do with that and stuff. And then so finding what's possible is probably the first step, and then the thing that would make it work and make it like something exciting to the player is how can it be startling or interesting to the player, right? Like with the Steam notification thing, it's one thing that like, so to add some context, if you don't know, in Pony Island, there's a boss that makes it look like your friend on Steam is sending you a message, and it makes it look and sound exactly like Steam. And thankfully, Steam has not changed their interface much over the years, so it still works. And so the question is like, sure, I can do that, but then like, how do we craft it put it in the moment where it'll be surprising and interesting? So that took some creativity of like, in that case, you type something into the boss asks you, say something disgusting, and then you think of something and say it, and you're like, okay, sure, whatever, poo, and you say it, and then your friend immediately sends you a message saying that with like a question mark, and then so it was kind of a synergy of the idea, what's possible, implementing it, and then figuring out how to use it effectively at the right time, I guess, are the two different challenges. But as far as like coming up with those things, it's just like, it's kind of like very basic, like what can a computer do, and what have other games not done? I think some of the Metal Gear games thought of that question and answered it for some of their crazier stuff, like on the PlayStation.
Sorry, the mic was muted, but they said thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Okay. Oh, we got another question.
You know the old saying that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts? So when you're creating a game and you want to try to follow that principle where you create a bunch of little systems that are seemingly independent, but they're able to interact with each other and produce some really interesting results, how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess there's two ways to think of it. Like, it's like you could think of these parts as coming together into a game because they're unified by like a strong aesthetic, like they're unified by like a very strong art style and very good sound effects, and maybe if these different mechanics don't interact so well, they can still be an interesting kind of collection of things. I guess there's another way to interpret that, which is like you have a bunch of different mechanics in the game, and how can they work together in different kind of combinations. I think it's it's something that you identify on a per game basis and on a per mechanic basis. There's one exercise that I've heard people do that, and I've heard some famous Japanese game developers like Miyamoto and such have done, is making sort of a graph or even a circle, writing every mechanic in their game. Like we got Goombas, mushrooms, fire flowers, etc. And then drawing lines between the ones that already have intersecting kind of components, and then noticing which mechanics are not touching or not doing anything with each other yet. So, like a Goomba and a mushroom, they never touch or do anything. But what if now a mushroom makes a Goomba big, and if you don't catch the mushroom in time, now you have to deal with a giant Goomba. Stuff like that. So that's an interesting design exercise. Obviously very specific. I don't know if that really addresses your question, but it came to mind.
They said it was a good tip. Okay. One more question, I think.
Cool.
So, hello, Daniel. I'm Joseph,
Hey.
and I would like to ask you, what do you think the future holds for you? Would you like to continue making your own games, or maybe you would like to join a company or work in a game development studio?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think I would like to do what I'm doing now as long as I can. And yeah, I'm really, really grateful and happy with what I do. And it takes years to make these games now. Inscryption took 3 years. This next one might take 3 or 4. It's a long and hard process, but I really like the process. So I just want to keep doing that. I want to, by the time I'm old, have this huge catalog of games that I've made. No guarantees, things are changing every day with the technology we use and the industry. So I'm just going to keep trying to do it as long as I can.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I am really inspired by you. Like, I'm just seeing your dedication still, that you still want to continue making your own games. It's like heavily inspiring.
Thank you.
And I would also like to ask you, how do you think, how would a game development team, like a small team, be motivated? So you know how many teams just quit in the middle of a game, like they don't know how to properly plan a game, or they just quit in the middle, they lose motivation. How would a team stay motivated?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think part of the reason why people quit or aren't able to finish is due to tech debt in their code base, not writing clean and maintainable code. I think that should be taken very seriously in a game. When it starts to become harder and harder to fix bugs, and the bug that you fix is a bunch of spaghetti code that makes it even harder next time, that's tech debt, and that can kill a game in mid-development. And so you could lose motivation simply because every time you want to change something, it's impossibly difficult because of all your crappy spaghetti code. But there's other, let's say you're doing everything right, and you're just a game is a long slog and you need some kind of feedback. I think there are milestones you can set that can give you a motivation boost. For instance, partway through the game, you can release a trailer, and if people are responding to that positively, or you even get a few nice comments, that can be fuel to make you feel like what you're doing is important and worthwhile. Keep going again. You might take your game to some kind of public show and let people on the show floor come by and play it, and seeing people's reactions and hearing their comments can be another kind of shot in the arm of motivation. So I think it's an important thing to consider, spacing out those things so that when you start to feel like you're forgetting why you're doing it, or you haven't gotten any external validation in a while, that you have something coming up that can give you that.
Thank you for telling us that. I also wanted to ask just this very classic question. Do you think ChatGPT is going to take over our jobs in game development?
Yeah, I'm
or
not
AI
sure.
in general, because it's such a big thing right now that even I myself am concerned a little bit.
Yeah, it's hard to say. Like right now, I don't think any of these AI programs are are better than a human. They can assist a human, and I suppose they could create a situation where one human does the work of what now takes three. But I personally, in the near term, I don't see like humans being replaced completely. It's very hard to predict, though. You know, the technology is getting better all the time, but I don't know. It's a weird time to be alive, for sure. Very weird time to be alive. But I do think that for the foreseeable future, like, we will need humans in the process.
That is true, because in the end, nothing can beat human creativity and the human mind. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, for now at least.
Yeah. So we actually have one question from one of our Discord members. So I'll just tell you that. So this question is asked by Lychee, and she says, what do you think helps you come up with inspiration for your ideas and be able to evaluate what makes a good game? Like a frame of reference, or would you say it's better to have played or studied a lot of games before you make your own game, or to draw from real life or other media sources like maybe films or some videos, something like that?
Yeah, I think playing games.
So what might be your biggest source of inspiration?
I would say definitely, like, my personal biggest source of inspiration is other games. Something just like when I play something really good, there's usually one or two things about it that I pick up and I say, how can I take this and use this idea in my own work somehow? And I think playing games in general will give you a strong intuition about, like you were asking, how do you know if an idea is good, or how can you evaluate your own game? And that is a hard thing to do, but I think if you've played a lot of games, you build up that intuition and understanding of what works about them. And especially if you maybe start your game development journey now and you continue playing games, you'll maybe have a more critical eye, and you'll think more about how certain things are done when you're playing them for enjoyment, which might detract from your enjoyment, but it might be edifying as well.
Thank you for telling us all that. So I have one question. What would you say is, like, what is the best piece of advice that you would give to students like us, college students? And like specifically, would you say we should go the route you went, that is publishing your own games and creating your own studio and everything, or would you prefer if we first like start in a studio, or how do we proceed once we graduate from college?
Yeah, I think, this touches a little bit on stuff I was saying earlier, but I think while you're in school, it might be a good idea to dip your toes into trying to make a small game with a game engine like Unreal or Unity, learning those tools and trying to make small things. Game Jam might be an opportunity for that. And then I think the next step after graduating is probably to get a job at a bigger company and figure out some more like industry standard practices and learn from really talented people, and then build up a foundation to try striking out on your own. Another consideration is like a financial consideration. If you graduate and immediately try to become an indie developer, I don't know where your savings came from for that. That might be difficult. Maybe if you work in the industry for a bit and you build up a financial cushion, then taking a risk like making an indie game would make more sense.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions? Okay. We have one question.
Hey, I was wondering, what's a struggle that you face specifically as an indie game studio and a developer that you don't feel that people working in the AAA industry would face? Like somebody working at Blizzard versus somebody working at indie game development company. What's like your biggest struggle that you face that you don't think translates to the big companies?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it might come actually back to that question about motivation, where like for a small team or a solo developer, if I am not working for a day for whatever reason, then the gears have ground to a halt. Nothing's happening. At a big company, things are pushing forward no matter what. As long as like the leadership is keeping things on track, someone's coming in every day and working on the game. So I think with a very small team, it's like it's got to make sure that you're doing smart work every day and you're not wasting your time on something or you haven't lost the will to look at your game anymore because you've become demoralized about it for some reason. So I think with a small indie team or a solo developer, it's like the personal, like psychological aspect of it is a bigger part of it. I think you're muted.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. I was asking, so how did you meet your team members, and like how big is your team as of right now?
Yeah, so right now I have a sort of weird approach where I have contractors, and a lot of them, for various reasons, don't work on the game full time. Usually because they're freelancers who pick up other work, and also because I don't always have like a ton of work to keep them busy the whole week. So I have about four freelance 3D artists who are kind of in the mix. I have Jonah, who I mentioned earlier, who does music and sound effects. For this game, I actually have a historical consultant, and again, she's not like working on this every day or even close to it. Just like I send an email asking some questions and hope to get an answer at some point. I guess that's the major people, and then I have a few, contacts who every once in a while I need some help with something. Like I know someone who does graphics and shader programming, and so if I get stuck on a shader, I have someone who I know who I could say, hey, like, could I pay you for a few hours to like solve this specific problem I'm having? So yeah, I have a lot of like people orbiting, but not a lot of people who are dedicated to the project the whole time, and I kind of like it that way. But as far as the total people orbiting, maybe about like 10, including myself.
Awesome. And does anybody else? Okay, we have one question.
Hi, sort of an extension of that last question. How would you go about finding these people to add to your team, to freelance, to do all these things, get these contacts with these different skill sets?
Yeah, for sure. Great question. A lot of the artists who I've worked with, I've found just on like various social media, like Twitter. There's a lot of activity for game developers, a lot of conversations happening on Twitter, but there's a lot of artists who will post their work there. And whenever I see someone who's making good work, I always follow them. And if they made a post at one point saying like, oh, I'm looking for contract work, then I might email them. I've done job postings in the past where I explicitly say I'm looking for someone to do exactly this job, and I put it on a job board and I get applicants there. And then sometimes it is through friends or colleagues who I've worked with in the past. Like I have a friend who I worked with at some of those Vancouver game studios that I got into the industry with, and he's doing 3D art on my game. And then sometimes, he might know someone personally and recommend them. So yeah, various different ways. I think being engaged online is a way to find people, in being engaged in game dev communities on Twitter or Reddit or stuff like that.
Are there any specific platforms that you would recommend that we can find people upon?
Well, for sure, for art, I mean, for me, finding 3D artists is the biggest thing, because I do 2D and pixel art myself, but I don't have the 3D art skills. So one site that pretty much any 3D artist worth their salt is on is ArtStation, and they'll post their portfolio and everything there. That's, if you're looking for a 3D artist, that would be the place to look. As far as like programmers, it's not something I typically am looking for, so I couldn't speak to that. And I guess same for audio too, because I've never needed to look.
Okay, awesome. So there's one more question from our Discord member, Lychee, and it is that how much time do you get to play games for fun as a game developer, or maybe for ideas and inspiration?
Yeah. There is that thing, right? Like it's never like it's never fully for. Well, it's sometimes fully for fun. Like if I'm playing Fortnite with my friends, like there's not a lot of lessons. I mean, to be fair, it's a well-designed game. There are lessons to be learned, but after like the 10th, 20th, 100th time, I don't think you're absorbing anything new there. So that happens for fun, but then an indie game always has my wheels turning. It's never fully for enjoyment. There's always like an analytical aspect. But I do have lots of time to play games. Like I mentioned earlier that I keep to sort of a 9 to 5 schedule. So as long as I don't have something going on that night, then I could spend some time playing games. So I definitely, I think it's important to do, and I do continue to indulge.
So how much time would you say like you work in the day, and like how do you keep the balance of work life?
Yeah, just like 8-hour normal work day, obviously with like lunch break, a coffee break, that kind of stuff in the day, or inevitably something will come up. You take your cat to the vet or something, you know, never a perfect solid day. But and the motivation, I guess, at a broader level is getting external validation, enjoying the work, working with people who inspire you can all be great ways to stay motivated. Not overworking, not turning it into this slavish thing that you feel like consumes all your time. I think it helps to not burn out or lose their motivation.
Awesome. So does anybody else have any other questions? Anybody? Okay, we have one more question from Mitch.
Sure.
In Inscryption, there's a moment where a character says that they're going to actually delete a file on your computer.
Yeah.
Was there ever any point in development before you realized that that was not something you could technically do that you actually considered deleting that file?
Yeah. I love the question. Yes, the original plan was that it would delete the file. This was actually the one and only thing that my publisher Devolver pushed back against. Everything else they were fine with, and they were like, "Are you serious? Like, are you?" They were pushing at me at the same time as I was playtesting, and at the time, like I hadn't actually made it deleted yet, but the plan was that it will work. And so some of the playtesters were saying like, "Oh my God, like there's this photo of my grandfather who passed recently, and you put that on the line for me. I didn't have a backup." And at the time, it actually couldn't have been deleted. But some of those kinds of things started to get into my diabolical brain and make me realize that it wasn't a good idea. So it was pushed back from playtesters, the publisher. And then in the end, I believe there was some technical issue that actually made it very hard or impossible, even if I wanted to. So a lot of things conspired to make that not happen. It's probably for the best. But thanks for asking.
So do we have any other questions from someone? All right, we have one more question.
I have a random one that I kind of might already know the answer to just based off of Inscryption and stuff you've said earlier. But what would you say are your favorite genres of games?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, probably not surprising. Card games is definitely one of them. I still play a lot of Magic in real life, Magic Arena, Hearthstone, the obvious go-tos there. I became obsessed with Valheim during the pandemic, and so I have become interested in the survival / crafting genre. But I've never quite found anything that's quite as good as Valheim. I haven't tried Pal World yet, but you can tell me how that is. But in general, I'm also looking for just thought-provoking indie games, like something that looks really well made and has an interesting premise. Recently, I tried Chants of Sinar, which was not a huge game on Steam, but it did get put up for some awards, and it had a lot of critical acclaim. And it's a little bit like that Obra Dinn detective-style gameplay, except you're trying to decode sort of alien, like they're not really aliens, but like alien to you languages, and you figure out what various symbols mean. So you know, that's a side rant about that game, but yeah, in general, I'm open to any interesting indie game that comes along, and I'm not too like biased on genre. I'd say I play everything. I think it's probably valuable to do that.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask a question on the financial side of things. So I wanted to ask, do you think game development as a career is profitable? Or is it that, because I've heard that game development is mostly for passionate people who are overburdened by these industries and companies who are making them like work overtime and this and that. Is that actually true? Or yeah, basically just how profitable is the career?
Yeah, I could see why you'd be interested in that as that might be coming up for you guys. I would say that that the crunch aspect of things has definitely improved, and that like it does still happen, like being forced to work long hours and not getting paid overtime. I think it does still happen, but I think it's been taken a lot more seriously over the years, and it's been brought up as a concern a lot. And so I from, you know, of course I don't work at a big company, but from the people I know, it's not as bad as it used to be. I think what you said about it being there's like passionate people who will work in games for less than for other tech companies financially. I think there is truth to that. And this is anecdotal, but you know, I know people in the tech industry and the games industry, and I think for similar levels of experience, you get a lot, maybe not a lot, but you get paid more and seem to get better benefits and stuff, say as a web developer than a games programmer. And I think what you said about there being people who just really want to be in games, so they're willing to throw themselves at these companies for less pay, I think there is some truth to that. But all that said, I think programmers in the games industry still get paid very well, you know, relative to like other professions, you know, in the first world. So I think it's definitely like you can have a comfortable living, absolutely. But I do think that you could get more working for tech or web companies.
And how much time do you think it requires to get to that level where you're being paid like a very good amount, as much as probably you would say as these tech companies pay you?
Yeah, maybe you're a few years behind. I don't know. And again, like I don't have the data for this in front of me. It's just anecdotal based on people I know. But maybe you're 1 or 2 years behind if you started. If one friend starts at a web company and the other is at a games company, maybe at year 0, the web person is getting paid as much as the game programmer at year 2. Who knows? Something like that. It's hard to estimate.
And what type of person would you be in? So if like you're offered a very highly paying job in the tech industry, would you take that or become a game developer in a game studio with less pay?
Yeah, I think when I was entering the industry and making that decision, I wanted to work in games, and so I was willing to make that sacrifice if in fact it was true. I was willing to do that. Of course, there probably would have been a limit to that, right? Like if Jeff Bezos had come and said, "Here's $200,000," then I probably would have taken it. But yeah, I think the passion for me was a factor for sure.
I really like that you believe in this idea that make your passion your work.
Yeah,
and you won't have to work the rest of your life.
Yeah, well, you still have to work, but you might enjoy it more.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, do we have any other questions? Okay, we have one more. One more. Yes.
So, if you had to choose your top 3 or maybe even top 5 indie games, what would they be, and which ones do you think you've drawn the most inspiration from?
Cool. I think back in the day, Binding of Isaac was one that I drew a lot of inspiration from, especially for Pony Island in a lot of ways, and that's probably up there. In recent years, I think I've said this game a few times now, but Return of the Obra Dinn is a very, very good game that I think is up there. Outer Wilds, also amazing indie game. Big fan of that. I see. I recently last year played Blasphemous 2, which is the Metroidvania in which you play the guy with the cone head. And if you know, you know. But like that was super good. Not an all-time favorite, but I'm just thinking of things that were cool and inspired me. Yeah, I think like all-time favorite indie games, definitely Outer Wilds, Return of the Obra Dinn, Binding of Isaac. Yeah, it's hard to make a list. I'm on the spot. Maybe I'll think of more later.
Thank you for telling us that. I just wanted to confirm, are you still living in Canada?
Yeah, I'm in Vancouver.
Oh, in Vancouver. And how would you say is the games industry in Canada? Like, is it better in Canada or in the US or somewhere else in the world?
Yeah, I guess it's hard to say. There's no doubt. There's no doubt about the fact that U.S. employees like make more money, but they might also be living in a city like San Francisco where the cost of living are very high. Of course, Vancouver's cost of living is very high, so it's not like we've got a benefit there. I think there definitely Canada is a very good place for making games. I think like Vancouver has a ton going on in the indie scene and in like the bigger AAA space and in the mid-sized studio space. Vancouver is a really good place to be. And I've heard great things also about Montreal and Ottawa and Toronto in that way. So I think you're definitely in the right spot. But as for what's better, it's hard to say. Obviously the United States is huge and there's a lot going on there and you can get paid more, but there's a lot of benefits for living in Canada too. So.
Yeah, but it is there. Like, it's not like we're in a state where there's just like barely some companies that are hiring or this or that. Like, they actively hire and are engaged and all.
Absolutely, yeah. There's like, a strong industry.
Of course, I know Larian Studios is there, who's just won the Game of the Year, Baldur's Gate 3. I think many people here must have played that game, and I am pretty sure Montreal has a very good industry.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
So, any other questions, guys? Noah, would you happen to have a question? Take the mic.
I don't think I have a question.
You had a lot already, so it's understandable.
Yeah, I had my opportunity. Okay, well, thank you for showing up and giving inspiration to all the people here. Yeah. Oh, we got a lot of waves as well. And I believe you have a time zone difference too. So I'm not sure if this is the middle of your day or the end of your work day.
No, it's still at the end. Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, I hope you have a wonderful evening. And yeah, again, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
We all learned a lot from you, Daniel. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming out. Great questions, everyone. Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you, Daniel.
Adios.
Bye-bye.